It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, focused on media and information literacy in partnership with First News. We've got a fantastic programme of speakers and I'm sure you will have questions for them. And what we're going to do is listen to all the presentations and then we will have a Q&A panel at the end. So please do share any questions in the chat and then we'll bring all the speakers into the spotlight to respond to them. From the SLA's perspective and our partners in the sector, we were really pleased to see the curriculum and assessment review and government response take steps in the right direction to acknowledging the need for media and information literacy skills development to be present in the English and PSHE curriculums. We believe this is a foundation on which to build, and we know that school librarians can play a key role in supporting these skills through the school library. And as we look to a future where young people will have the vote potentially at 16 and have to continue to navigate a world full of AI and increasing digital literacies, we must ensure we help them develop the skills necessary to become responsible citizens and make informed decisions. So in this webinar, we're going to be sharing insight into the tools available to support you to do this and examples of best practice, hopefully to inspire you, along with a real life media and information literacy expert who is going to give further advice. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce you to our first speaker. Helen Mulley is the former education lead at First News, which is the UK's only newspaper written for children, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it. And Helen was instrumental in developing the First News Media and Information Literacy Framework, along with the Media and Information Literacy Alliance. So welcome, Helen, this afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for having me. So thank you so much for letting me be here this afternoon. It's so good to be here with the SLA, because librarians, by definition, as keepers of those incredible information repositories, are absolutely at the heart of everything we're talking about today. I don't know if anybody has read Burning the Books by Richard Ovenden. Of all audiences, I would think that perhaps there's more chance than not that you have. But it's a fascinating look at libraries over time and their place in the social fabric, and how, when a despotic regime is making its move, one of the first places it attacks has always been the library, and there's a really good reason for that. So as Victoria said, I'm Helen Mulley. I, up until recently, was the education lead at First News, and I still work really closely with First News, especially around their media and information literacy work. And again, as Victoria said, I've spent the last 18 months, 2 years or so, working closely with the Media and Information Literacy Alliance, of which our other speaker today, Julian, is a trustee, also known as Mila, to develop our new media and information literacy frameworks for primary and secondary schools. And those frameworks feed into the First News Media and Information Literacy Teach Kit, which includes fully resourced schemes of work for lower Key Stage 2, upper Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, and brand new lessons added every fortnight based on the latest stories that are likely to be catching young people's attention. So today I'd like to talk to you about why media and information literacy matters so much for young people. And again, I've got a feeling that I'll be preaching to the choir here, but I don't think we can overstate the importance of this. And it's so good just to lay it on the line for everyone. How it connects to the curriculum developments that are coming down the line, and crucially, how First News can support you as school librarians to build MIL skills with pupils in a way that feels achievable, exciting, and absolutely purposeful and powerful. So starting with the why. Information ecosystem that children are living in now is it's noisy, it's chaotic, and it's deliberately designed to overwhelm, to create addiction, and to feed fear, confusion, and hatred. I was at a roundtable event yesterday with representatives from a huge range of organisations concerned with the safeguarding of children, and some of the stories were just horrific. Yes, we have the Online Safety Act now, and yes, that's a start when it comes to protecting our young people from some of the most serious harms out there. But the implementation of the OSA has a long way to go, and the report issued by Ofcom today about how it's going shows just how huge the challenges are. And even if we don't focus on these extreme harms, and of course they are part of a continuum anyway, we know that today's pupils are having to navigate news that travels faster than ever, opinion that's dressed up as fact, AI content that can be convincing but wrong, algorithms shaping what they see, and peer-to-peer sharing that gets around traditional gatekeeping processes. And they're doing all this while still developing the cognitive tools they need to evaluate what's trustworthy. Sometimes from an incredibly young age. Ofcom's Media Use and Attitudes report that came out in May, I think, this year, revealed astoundingly that almost 4 in 10 parents of 3 to 5-year-olds were reporting that their children had access to social media sites. I can't even imagine how that works. That said, this overwhelming, information saturated, confusing world that children are growing up in is also a wonderful world with all kinds of incredible possibilities. The access to information, the ability to share information, the ability to make positive connections with people regardless of geographical location, the ability to amplify positive, powerful messages. All of these are really exciting possibilities, and it's really important to us at First News that any talk about media information literacy, and certainly any practice of the teaching of media and information literacy, is at least as much about the positive, empowering side of this coin as it is about the keeping children safe side of the coin. In fact, it's arguable that the more you focus on that empowered positive side, the more equipped children are to deal with that flip side anyway. You know, it almost goes hand in hand. And of course, you know, at the heart of all this, you've got the children themselves, and they are, as everyone here knows very, very well, they are wonderfully, incredibly curious. We speak to children all the time. They tell us all the time that they want to understand what's going on in the world. They want to be informed. They just want to have more control in how they're informed, and they need a bit of help in making sense of all the information that they get. I was at another event a few weeks back, and there was a panel of teenagers there, and they were crying out for support in just knowing what they could trust, and how to check whether they could trust what they were seeing and hearing or not. And of course, that is absolutely where the library and librarians come in. You're the adults in school who most consistently support children in becoming these critical, independent seekers and assessors of information that we want them to be. You're already teaching them to ask good questions, to navigate sources, to reflect on what they're reading. Because it's a truism, but media and information literacy really is not something new, as you know, media study teachers across the land will be crying out to remind us all. When we talk about it in this context, it's really about nurturing those skills that teachers and librarians have always wanted to encourage in children, and putting them in the context of new landscapes and new technology. I am sure that we are all very aware that the Curriculum and Assessment Review has called for media literacy to be embedded into whatever the revised curriculum looks like for first teaching from September 28. They suggest strongly, the government response suggests that it will be put into the citizenship curriculum, and also when it comes to AI in the computing curriculum. And crucially, that the citizenship curriculum will be extended to primary. Now, that in itself is a big shift. I think there are the people who are passionate about media and information literacy, including First News, will argue that it's not enough, and there's a big old gap about where the funding for all this is going to come from. But those are conversations for another space. I'm going to focus on the fact that it has had that status raised at all, which is a big important shift, and it signals that media and information literacy won't be something that a few passionate teachers do in an enrichment slot across schools. But we know that teachers don't feel confident teaching it very often. First News has done its own research which shows this really strongly, and of course time in the curriculum is tight, and however they rejig it for September 2028, I'm pretty sure that we all know it is still going to be tight. And that is another reason why libraries are going to be so important as part of this process. And you're in a great position to provide the continuity and the coherence that a whole school approach to media and information literacy needs. And if you can support teachers by offering ready-made high quality resources, as well as your expertise in research skills and curation and critical thinking, then so much the better. Which is my way of leading into what we have been doing at First News, and what I would like to share with you, and what I hope is something that can really support all of you in this really important work. We have been working with MELA, as I said, the Media and Information Literacy Alliance, and they've brought their deep academic policy sector knowledge to bear on this, as well as their experience of working in this space. And we've developed two frameworks which sit together, one for primary and one for secondary. These frameworks are actually based on MELA's original frameworks, which cover skills and competencies essentially from cradle to grave and right across society. And with their help and support, we've streamlined these, we've adapted them, and we've focused them particularly for schools. These frameworks are free to all schools, and they map out a clear progressive pathway of skills. And as you can see, they are divided up into 5 domains. You've got being informed, which is working out what to trust. It's knowing where information comes from and how you can assess your sources. Being empowered is about making good choices. It's about really critically digging in to what you're being told and placing it on a spectrum of trustworthiness and making good choices about that information. Being healthy is not particularly about monitoring your screen time and so on. It's more about seeking out really good quality, trustworthy health information online, and that's a really important pillar. There was research came out today, I think, from the Patient Information Service showing just how difficult this particular aspect of information literacy is becoming with the rise of AI technology and automatically generated answers to those important health questions that people are essentially searching for. And of course, with young people, you've also got the issue of influencers who might be sharing health advice, fitness advice, beauty advice, and all of those things. Being socially conscious is about using information kindly and fairly to help others. This is about becoming a positive force within society, using all the incredible possibilities that these new technologies offer, becoming responsible, considerate, socially conscious sharers and creators of information. And being connected is about finding, creating and using those online spaces that we are increasingly interacting with as human beings living in this brave new world that we live in. Yes, so as you will have seen from the frameworks, that was the primary framework. The secondary one builds on all of those domains for a secondary level audience. So as you could see, under each domain there were a set of I know, I can statements. So those set out the skills and competencies that sit under those domains and are a way of assessing where a child is on their media and information literacy learning journey. So you can audit, and you can benchmark, and you can track progress. I would actually just like to introduce Emily Hanson. You can't see her, but she is the new head of education at First News, and she is going to be taking this work forward with me and the rest of the team at First News. What does this mean for you as librarians? I mean, you can, as I say, you can use the frameworks to audit what's already happening in your school. You can use them to identify gaps. For example, your pupils may be great at identifying bias, but not so strong on checking sources or sharing carefully. Depending on your own situation and capacities, you could plan a spiral of skills that builds right from year 3 through to year 9. And you can definitely use these frameworks as a shared language when talking to teachers and everyone in school on how everyone can collaborate to develop a real culture of media and information literacy in your school. I am also just going to talk a little bit about what we have to offer on top of the free frameworks, which is our Teach Kit, which we developed based on those frameworks, because we know that not everyone has the time or the resources to develop lessons, still less a full curriculum based on a framework. So we have done that work for people who would like to make use of it. The Teach Kit offers complete 2-year schemes of work for lower Key Stage 2, upper Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. Each scheme of work comes with fully resourced lessons that map to the framework. And I think this is particularly important for you as librarians. Every fortnight we add brand new lessons across all 3 levels, and those are based on the latest news stories from First News, encouraging open discussion. Now, we know that is something that children are crying out for in schools. There was a recent report from Demos, some research from Demos called Inside the Mind of a 16-year-old. I really recommend reading it. It's fascinating. It's based on interviews with young people all around the UK. And one of the things that it showed is that all too often any kind of discussion about current events in classrooms or on school premises anywhere is being shut down by teachers pretty much as soon as it starts. Because in fairness, they're genuinely terrified of the consequences of potentially controversial conversations, and it could be argued that they have some reason to be. So at First News, we want those kinds of conversations to be normalized. We want news talk to be part of everyday dialogue in the classroom, in the playground, in the library. That's probably where it starts. So that the first time teachers talk about the news with students, it's not because something terrible has happened, because that's a lot for anyone to handle. This is the dashboard that you see if you're logged on to the Teach Kit. As you can see, you can add your year group. You've got the frameworks here. You've got the schemes of work here. But what I really want to show you are the teaching packs, just so that you can get an idea of the kind of skills that we're talking about and the kind of stories that you've got the structure to discuss through these resources. So Escaping the Echo Chamber, that's based on the story about Musk's Grokpedia launch. There was a story in the newspaper about how going to galleries can reduce stress, and we took that as a really good way to leap into the discussion around finding health information online. Is it true that art can reduce stress? How can you tell? Is that good advice? Can robots make stuff up? This is a story about how AI is trained to bluff if it doesn't know. So as you can see, with these keep coming, and these will keep coming across all 3 levels every fortnight.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was great. I think the framework looks like an absolutely fantastic resource, and just some of the things you've touched upon there around fear and the ability to have conversations. We know that school libraries offer that really amazing safe space with a school librarian on hand to guide conversation and encourage the interrogation and asking the right questions. Exactly. and teaching that skill is so important. But thank you so much, Helen. We'll bring you back later for any questions. I'm now going to move on to our next speaker. Now, I first met Ella earlier this year. She is the school librarian at Westminster Harris Sixth Form, And she was kind enough to host a visit from me during my early months as CEO at SLA. And I was really struck by the high esteem in which she is held by students and staff alike, and the brilliant work that she does to support them developing their information literacy skills as they look towards higher education. So she's just going to talk a little bit about what she does with her students and share some tips. So Ella, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
No problem. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, as Victoria said, I work with sixth form students, so obviously slightly older to the students Helen's been talking about, and very much in terms of trying to improve their media and information literacy, we're looking at this from quite an academic standpoint, and trying to build their university preparedness, essentially. So these are the sorts of things that I want to cover with our students and want to improve their familiarity and confidence with. And this is done through various academic skills outreach lessons that I do to all subjects within our school. I know that sometimes this can be seen as a sort of responsibility of English or politics or sociology, but we want this to be running throughout all the subjects within our school. So the first thing that I want our students to really have an awareness of is reliability. I think that term can sometimes be quite broadly used and have associated terms with it that students see, for example, peer review, but we actually take a more in-depth look at what a peer review actually is. Why would it add reliability to a source? Equally, some of our students can fall into a trap of assuming just because somebody is from a certain institution, it means they're more reliable. So that's a really valuable way to bring in the sort of bias within academia as well and have conversations around that. Obviously, criticality is something that I really want our students to develop. Traditionally, obviously, students were able to go to the school library and access the physical resources in there, but with the incredible digital world that students have access to, there is simply so much information on the table for them to indulge in. So one thing we really want to develop is criticality skills with our students in terms of searching, but also selecting the sources that they find. So I do a lot with our students looking at actually how to form a solid research inquiry, how we can ensure that the information that they're receiving through that is reliable, okay, is from trusted sources. And one thing that we've sort of questioned with that is the rise of AI, as I'm sure you're all very aware of. If you now plug something into Google, the first thing that comes up is not the Google results anymore. It is a box with AI sort of suggestions and linked resources. So we've actually been doing some work into looking at, are those the best resources that you could use for your search? The other thing that I've really wanted our students to develop criticality with is actually having independence in searching where recommended sources are from. I'm sure you've seen there's been a lot in the press about especially ChatGPT and other AI platforms suggesting papers or citing papers to students, academic papers that don't actually exist, but they look like they would exist. So if it sort of suggests a paper written by Richard Feynman in his time at Los Alamos, that on paper would look sensible, would look logical, because Richard Feynman was very much at Los Alamos working on the Manhattan Project. So we actually look at, can we track down sources that AI is citing to us and not just taking it as blindly reliable. One thing that I say to our students is I think we can have a tendency to believe that a computer can't lie because it's a machine. Humans, we can lie. Machines, everything they say is completely reliable. So one thing we've been looking at is, okay, if we're getting suggested results, yes, you may have at secondary school, you've been looking at, okay, are we having paid for results near the top of Google? But actually, especially with that AI chat box there now, are the sources that are being promoted in that actually real, or are they fabricated sources? So we've been doing quite a lot of backtracking, snowballing backwards of resource links to double check the credibility around those. The other thing that we've been thinking about with that as well are, do sources contain AI content? So I've been doing quite a lot of teaching around actually how various AI platforms pull their information together, where that information is coming from, is that information itself reliable, who's checking that information. And also, I think raising the ethical sides of AI as well. Something I spoke to a group of students about recently was, if you put your image into AI, what's happening to that image? What's being done with it? Yes, it might provide for you a nice little image of you drawn in a sort of Renaissance style, but actually what else is happening to that image? So I think that has allowed some of our students to think a little bit more about what is going on with information that they're putting into AI and the consequences of that. I think lastly, the thing that I want our students to develop confidence with is, as I say, critically questioning the sources that they're using. When I first sort of started speaking to students about this, especially in a sort of context of our history students with our history coursework, and we were talking about investigating the papers and the books, lectures, various sources that academics had written, and I was talking about questioning the sort of validity of those academics. Some of the students asked me if that was wrong, if it was unfair, if that was actually part of scholarship. And I was saying to them, yes, it is. We shouldn't just blindly trust academic sources. We need to have quite a rigorous approach to looking at those, to looking at where they're housed, who they're published by, when they were published, everything we sort of might have traditionally taught students. But thinking about that, as I say, with the rise of more modern media, and basically helping to give them practice in that and to gain familiarity and confidence with it. One thing that I really want them to do is to develop those skills now, often make their mistakes now, come and speak to me if they have problems with this now, purely because the consequences for them can be so severe at university level if they don't have these skills in their toolkit, essentially, and they sort of end up in academic dishonesty waters. So one thing when I'm speaking to teachers about this sort of outreach program going on is saying, yes, we're advantaging our students now in terms of their studies, but also this is really going to benefit them when they go on to further study. And we're not just teaching them for, our context, we're teaching them for future contexts as well. One thing I would say is when I sort of initially started teaching this, I fell into the trap maybe of assuming this whole idea of sort of digital natives generation would have a lot of these critical skills already, would have familiarity with them. That very much hasn't necessarily been the case. I hope, with a lot of talk around this being embedded in curriculums, that will change, but that's not going to change quickly, especially for our incoming students. So one thing I have been doing is stripping it back sort of right to basics and actually going from the ground up with this. And as I say, allowing our students to practice these skills now, make mistakes now, raise questions with me now. So when they go on to further study, if they wish, they feel confident and happy with all of these sorts of skills.
Honestly, Ella, they're really blessed to have you in that in your sixth form. I've got loads of questions I want to ask you, but we have another speaker. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. So useful to think about what's going to be happening with young people when they leave secondary and take the next steps in their education journey. So huge thanks for sharing your insight there. I am now really pleased to welcome our final speaker for the day. Not only is he an SLA patron, Julian McDougall is Professor in Media and Education and Principal Fellow of Advanced Higher Education at Bournemouth University, and he is a real live expert in media and information literacy with a whole plethora of roles across the sector, being involved in media literacy at the highest levels of government and influence in policy, and working with Ofcom and chair of the Media and Information Literacy Alliance. So a really strong set of skills to share inspiration and insight into this really important topic. So Julian, we're really happy to have you with us today, and thank you so much for being here to share some insights of your new book and how they might apply or be implemented in the school library space.
Thank you. As was said, I've just published this book, but it's not really about that. In the book, there's a theory of change for media literacy, but it also aligns very closely to the Mila framework, which is what was also used in the First News, development of the First News frameworks that you've seen. So when we get to that point, they're slightly different theory of change categories, but the idea is exactly the same as in the First News and the Mila frameworks. And I'm going to talk about the critical role of the school library towards the end of this. I dropped into the chat an article that was published in the New York Times by A.J. Jacobs. And the reason why I've done that is because previous colleague was talking about the rise of AI and made the point that I totally agree with, that we should really resist the idea that AI is something new. And that article is great because this guy tries to live without AI for 48 hours and he realizes he can't really do anything, and that so many of the things he's been doing for the last 10 years are actually AI generated. So it's a nice thing to share with students, actually, or with colleagues, or with anyone who wants to think about AI as this thing that's just arrived, to understand that actually we've all been using it, whether we realise it or not, for the best part of a decade or so. MILA is the UK chapter of the UNESCO MIL Alliance. I want to share some key findings from a UNESCO global study first to put this in context. But most classrooms across the world don't have media literacy, and there's a distinction between functional skills and active use that pervades. Also, across regions and within countries, there's huge variability. And in most contexts, it's not a standalone subject. And although we are applauding the inclusion of media literacy and citizenship, I'll say personally, and from Mila, I think, we would say as well, we would have preferred a standalone subject. But given that's not happened, we're happy with the location it has been afforded. So here we are. And as has previously been mentioned, so I won't rehearse it at length, we now have the curriculum assessment review. We know we are going to see media literacy in the school curriculum, and it's going to be across the curriculum, but it's named in the citizenship curriculum as well. But in my opinion, problematically, AI is kind of annexed off to computing. So that previous slide where it's the difference between functional skills, technical skills, and kind of criticality is a tricky one. What I want to do is just make this point, the difference between functional skills and active learning, and why the location of media literacy and citizenship is helpful, and why the school library is also important, because I think it's a dynamic space. So the distinction between static and dynamic ideas of literacy doesn't come from me. This comes from the kind of New Literacy Studies group, going back quite a long time. But in summary, we have a problem in schools that the educational system kind of renders literacy as a static thing that you can measure, that's fixed, you have or you don't. But also we do this thing in education where we add new literacies as though we still have this kind of standard literacy, which is text, print, oral, and then we add the others: media, visual, XR, multimodal, gaming, data, algo, health. And really, we need to think about literacy in itself as a kind of ever-changing, ever-shifting, dynamic and negotiated and ideological space. And when we think about it in that way, we think about literacy as deeply social, deeply situated. And then we start to think about third spaces as the best places to develop literacy, because they're the spaces where people can bring their everyday experiences from the first space, i.e. with media, AI, tech, good and bad, easy and challenging, into a space where they can exchange their knowledge with skilled information professionals, teachers, and of course librarians as well. So the reason why I do this, and pause on this just for a second, is to say everything that I believe about literacy supports the idea that a school library is a very good place to nurture it, because I believe that school libraries are spaces where literacy can be seen as dynamic, because it's outside of the static framing of the school subject. So this is the theory of change, and it has 4 elements. It is not linear, but consequences are difficult to achieve because they are the consequences of the other 3. So it's not linear, except consequences is the 4th, if that makes any sense. So the 3 that are non-linear are access, awareness, and capabilities. And media literacy interventions can make a difference across those 3, or in one area or 2 areas. But when they cross the threshold from those 3 elements into consequences, it means that it's made a difference to people's lives longer term. And the problem, of course, is that in education we don't measure that, and in most media literacy interventions we can't measure that because the funding doesn't take us into like 2-3 year longitudinal follow-ups. So when we talk about the difference that media literacy makes, we often provide evidence of the manifest potential for positive change, but we're not able to evidence it within the duration of the projects. And of course, if you're teaching people at school, it's difficult to know how they will behave differently in their lives as a result of your teaching 10 years later. Can we move on, please? I'm going to just leave these on the screen and go through them quickly. So that's the first one, access. These are, I should have said this, by the way, to give some more credibility to this. This theory of change that developed at Bournemouth University was the product of 10 years of research projects. So it wasn't like one day we just said, what do we think access looks like? These are kind of, in a way, the cumulative findings of a decade of research. So when media literacy makes a difference to people's access, it looks like those things on the screen now. Can we move forward? When it makes a difference to people's awareness, it does those things. And awareness is where we find most of the evidence, because, you know, education and literacy interventions tend to be about shifting, developing, repurposing, remotivating people's critical awareness. And so sometimes it's enough to just say that's what we've done. One of the problems we have in media literacy is this kind of solutionist rhetoric where we say we're going to do a project, shift people's awareness, and then that will, you know, save democracy, which is not necessarily going to happen within the scope of the project. We hope it will. So the capability idea is formulated from the work of Sen, who did a lot of work, particularly in kind of health context as well as education. It's about people's ability to combine their resources with their functionings into life capability changes. And you can see those things on the screen are the kinds of things that we find shift in people. Their capabilities develop in those ways when they have active media literacy. But the note at the bottom is terrifically important. And, you know, I could give you a long list of people in the world who have high levels of media literacy capability who are not using those for positive things. You'll be aware of prominent influencers. You may be aware of some prominent politicians. You may have people inside your schools. But, you know, we need to shift our thinking away from the idea that it's the media literacy that solves your problems. It's not. It's the uses of media literacy for positive consequences that will solve our problems. And so really the holy grail, where if we can achieve it, we know that media literacy makes a difference in these kinds of ways. It's where it's accumulative. It's where lots of different people are using their media literacy for positive consequences. And then, of course, there's less harm to be resilient to. So at the moment, we're stuck in this kind of, I would say, neoliberal kind of individual responsibility bubble where, you know, things are pretty toxic, things are pretty challenging. The digital environment's not great in terms of kind of morals and ethics and social justice, but the focus is all on individual people making themselves resilient to that, rather than necessarily kind of fixing the problems that cause the harm. But the other flip side of that is that if everybody was more media literate and everybody was more media literate with positive intention, then of course there would be different expectations of platforms, media, information providers, and other people. And so over time, that communication ecosystem would become healthier because more media literate people would have higher expectations of such. I just want to get into this for just a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to focus in on the school library again. So I personally don't believe we need a different AI literacy. I think, and I think First News think as well, and other kind of providers in the space agree that we can have a media literacy that's a kind of umbrella, all-encompassing literacy that can include AI, which is why it's problematic that it's in computing separately. But if we were to think about AI literacy, I like this idea of having core values. This is from a project by We Are Open, that's the BBC Innovation Development Fund. And if you see the criteria here, agency empowerment, EDI, critical thinking, responsible use, human rights well-being, they're not functional skills or static, you know, knowledge attribution. These are active agentive values, and they're deeply social. So I really encourage anyone thinking about AI literacy or AI within media literacy to think about, we should be having conversations with students about the AI we want and the AI we deserve, not only dealing with the AI we have that's, let's face it, being developed rapidly, you know, in Silicon Valley for pursuits that might not be congruent with our own needs and desires. And previously, a colleague earlier very helpfully kind of challenged the digital natives idea, and of course I totally agree. And I love this quote from Jen Rousel, who's written this brilliant book that I highly recommend called The Comfort of Screens. It's like a deep ethnography from one street during COVID. And what she did was she had a team of researchers, and they went into every house, every family, and they just really chronicled the myriad of different ways in which people are engaging with screens. And it's obviously anyone who wants to talk about screen time in a binary way, this book just completely throws that out the window, which is not helpful for policymakers, of course, but it's helpful for humans who want to understand better how we have kind of deeply idiosyncratic and personal relationships with technology. But what she talks about in the book is this idea of we're all digital amphibians, right? Because we're living in what's called on life. You know, we're in a sense in this kind of post-digital world where we only notice digital when it's absent. So Wi-Fi doesn't work. It's like air and water. You don't think about them and they're there, but as soon as they're not there, it's a problem, right? But still, we're always in these two realms at the same time, like land and water, I suppose. So instead of thinking about migrants and natives, which of course is massively problematic in other ways, more helpful to think about these digital amphibian experiences that we're having. But the end of the quote's great, where she says we should be taking care to sort our own interests from those thrust upon us to profit from our effect. And that's, I think, a key message around AI that's really important. The role of the school library, which is so important. This was a project that I did in partnership with the SLA a couple of years back now, where we worked in the school library for a project that was specifically about media literacy and improving mental health. So a very quick explanation of this. We worked with young people who, through a Bounce Together survey, had disclosed that they'd had experiences in the digital world that they'd found challenging and they felt it had a negative impact on their mental health. So it wasn't diagnosed, it wasn't sensitive in that sense. This was self-disclosure. I've had experience in the digital world. I think they've had a negative impact on mental health. So we did a media literacy intervention. And we were looking at developing this concept of a kind of third space new practice model in school libraries for media literacy. You can see on the left, we've got the theory of change elements. And then for each element, we had lessons and we had life in media, mindful media, media action and media change. So we were taking students through activities that related to our theory of change elements. And the first news frameworks that we've worked with Helen and the team on adopt a similar approach to this in terms of thinking about the framework as being a series of kind of active engagements with media information. And we found these two things. So the work produced, the young people showed an advanced understanding of the need for change in the digital life world for their own age group. But this is really important. They felt they'd engaged with our project too late to make these changes in their own lives. So one of the things we have to be mindful about when we're doing this work is the young people that we're working with often have had this kind of digital habitus, if you like, these deeply entrenched habits for a long time until we get there. So we can do some work around AI and algorithm literacy, but the idea that that's going to mean a young person doesn't use TikTok anymore is like so unlikely. So what we need to be doing is looking for shifts and inflections and reflexive kind of engagements with students' first space, I would say, kind of digital life worlds, rather than really believing that literacy can change life habits so quickly. But what was interesting as well was that the students we worked with were not operating in ways that we might have expected or anticipated in terms of activism or intentionality. They were fairly passive in the face of the kind of the digital environment, actually. And these were, I'm not going to say too much about the school, but these were a particular group of students who you would say were fairly privileged and affluent. But it might be, therefore, that they need to make positive change was less of an issue for them because they were not terribly disadvantaged by the society as it is currently. But of course, we didn't go into that's a hunch. So if you're interested, along with the book, there's this interactive map. It's more interesting than it looks on the screen right now. What you can do is you can click on a country, and there's 400 projects that are mapped to this theory of change, and it will flag all of the projects in that country that have been shown through the theory of change criteria to have made a difference in one way or another. Or you can click on one of the 4 themes: access, awareness, capability, consequences, and it will kind of light up the map, and you can see where there are projects all over the world that have met the criteria for one of those 4 elements. Or you can search for a project by just going in the search bar and putting the name in. So of course, when you buy the book, and this presentation is shrewdly timed for the Christmas market, of course. So when you buy the book and you read about it, and I want to find out more about that project, you can go onto the interactive web map and find it. What you can also do is add your own project to the map. So I just want to flag that as the most important thing. There's a way in which you can go to the website and add your own project, add the location, add the theme, and then it comes through to our team. Of course, it's moderated. And then the idea is that over time, the map will be populated by the media literacy community. Those are the key recommendations. Third spaces, co-design, co-creation, good collaborations between teachers, librarians, parents, carers, external partners. Thinking about what media literacy is for as a first principle, rather than seeing it as a kind of, in itself a solution. And the last point on the screen, I always say it, I don't want to take a position on it. You guys are much more the experts in this because you're working with young people every day, but I don't see how smartphone bans and this work go together, but that's just my view. And I genuinely mean I just don't see how, not that I am taking a position either. Help is on the way, so there will be a lot of material out there now for teachers because it's going to be in the curriculum. So those links, first one is a project I did with Ofcom where I mapped CPD provision to their outcomes. So there's a report on that you can find. The Association of Citizenship Teachers have a set of resources, and because media literacy is in citizenship, I am going to flag that. And then, of course, I'm going to flag the First News Teach Kit that we're talking about today as well, because Mila was a partner on that, and we obviously therefore think it's very good. There we go. Plug the book again. And just to conclude by saying media literacy can make a difference for a healthier future, but only if we have a dynamic framing of such. Thank you for your attention.
I have to say I can't see questions in the chat, but I have a couple of questions that I would just like to ask, because I know there are definitely things that I thought about when I was a school librarian. One of the observations I would have is that none of these skills exist in isolation, which obviously you made the point of saying, you can teach someone to be media literate, but you can't necessarily teach them to be a nice person and use it positively. And I think that's where things like empathy come in, and obviously the school library has a massive role to play in supporting the development of empathy through stories. So I suppose it's just for me emphasising the point, the role that the school library can play across all of these areas, and especially linked to this. And the other thing is around, I always used to have conversations with teachers around students being IT literate, like they could make the computer work and do really clever things, but they weren't information literate. And obviously they're very, very different things. But one question I would have possibly for Ella, but you all might have some tips, is that notion of collaboration with teachers, because obviously at the moment we're in this development phase and it's coming down the line, but I know that there'll be lots of librarians who want to be doing these things in school but necessarily can't engage with the curriculum leads or other colleagues in the right way. So how do you do that, Ella, in terms of your relationship building with your colleagues? What's the tip that you would sort of share in terms of engaging with your colleagues?
So this may be unhelpful, but essentially what I found the value of this is almost spread through word of mouth. So once you can deliver one session, then often that member of staff will go and talk about it in the staff room and often talk about how beneficial it was to the students, and the students will often speak about it as well. So due to our cohort size, we have multiple students studying a subject, multiple classes. Initially, I went into 1 or 2 classes for certain subjects, and the students in those classes found the sessions so valuable. They then spoke to their friends about it, who then said to their teacher, why haven't we had this session put on? So a lot of this has essentially snowballed in recent years through word of mouth. So my advice to everybody is, if you have a teacher who you have a positive relationship with, try and essentially get one of these sessions to run, because normally then everybody will come to you and ask you to run a similar session because they will know how valuable it is to the students.
Brilliant. And is that something you kind of considered, Helen, and maybe Julian as well, when you were kind of developing the Teach Kit, about how people would implement it? Because obviously you've got some amazing frameworks there and brilliant lessons planned. But did you kind of have that in your head in terms of who would be using the toolkit and how they might collaborate?
We had so many conversations about who would be using it and how they might collaborate, because that's one of the challenges, especially up until the point at which media literacy would become mandated in any way at all across the school. So all I can say is that we've tried to keep what we are offering to schools as flexible as possible, so that it can be, if you've got one passionate champion of media literacy in a school, then they can deliver these as like individual sessions, or if you've got more whole school buy-in, then you can incorporate the whole curriculum. But I think I would say that one of the things we do say that's the most critical thing any school could do in terms of building a media and information literacy culture is to give it a face and a name, have someone in the school who is responsible for media and information literacy, and then, exactly as Ella said, people will come to that person, and it will be spread. But you need them to have a name and a face and genuine passion and knowledge.
Enter librarian from stage right.
Absolutely.
And just one final thing. Helen, you mentioned at the beginning about fear. Julian, I just wondered if you had any thoughts, because obviously you've done huge amounts of study in this area, and then kind of bringing that back into the school setting where teachers maybe are fearful about even broaching certain subjects, and then worried about AI. And how would you, if someone was just kind of starting out on this journey, as it were, how would you, where's the best place for them to start, do you think?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I'll try to be brief. The issue at the moment is that we're framing this for very good reasons, often around kind of safeguarding or problems, and I think it's really important to say schools will have safeguarding policies. This is related to that, but your job is not to solve all of these terrible problems that people are having in the world. In 1 hour of media literacy teaching, and your job is also not to be a tech expert. Your job is to be a good teacher, which combines agile kind of pedagogic strategies that tailor the resources that are out there to the needs of your students. Good pastoral engagement with student needs. But really, the key thing is, if you look at some of the best, most successful projects, they put students in roles of like ambassadors, of kind of champions. There's a lot of kind of peer-to-peer, and it's positive, right? And what we need to do is reframe it. So this is about how can young people thrive in the digital world and make the future better, not how can you stay safe in the wake of all this terror. And I think so one of the things to say to teachers is to try to adopt this in the same positive mindset that you would about any teaching that you're really passionate about. We don't teach literature and say, if you read great novels, you'll probably be safer, because we try and nurture a love of the subject. And I think it's about trying to kind of nurture a passion for being a media literate person, critical thinker, and then hopefully a positive agent in the social world.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I know that comes up, you sort of spoke to it a little bit then about putting students at the centre, and obviously for things like AI, there's some incredible tools for young people who might be dyslexic or have specific learning needs. And is there different parameters for the different types of students in terms of it's not a one size fits all approach, is it?
There's a lot of good resources for media literacy resources for students with SEND of various kinds, dyslexia, so there's always that differentiation at the level of resource anyway. It's recognised that it's not one size fits all. But I do think that my approach is often about trying to create a safe space for students to talk openly and honestly about the experiences they're having, good and bad, in the digital world. And that's why the whole, I know it's a cliche, I don't need to tell people in SLA, but that whole idea of library as third space, third place, is a super helpful dynamic environment, hopefully, for that kind of engagement. But I'll hand over to Helen on the specific question about differentiation of resource with the first news package.
Yeah, well, we did not go down, other than dividing it up into three broad age ranges. We didn't go through that 3 levels of differentiation process, because I think teachers and librarians know that true differentiation is individual to the student, and that's about meeting the student where they are and understanding their needs, and then working with them. So we have kept the resources in a format where the teacher or whoever is delivering them has the power to do that. They're designed. We're not going to shy away from having a conversation about huge protests in London with 7 and 8 year olds, especially 7 and 8 year olds who might be living in London and who will have seen them, or why flags are up with children who are seeing them on their streets, you know, in whatever town it is. We're not going to shy away from all that, but we are going to give teachers the toolkit so that they can meet the children where they are and then nurture that conversation forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that notion of meeting people where they are. I think that's so important. It's really important in our work at the SLA, because we know that all our members will be at different stages. Some won't, maybe won't even have a focus on this at the moment, but this is an opportunity. And I really do believe that as you've heard through the examples, that school libraries and librarians are so well placed to support with this. So I think probably all that remains for me to say is thanks to everybody for joining. I hope that's given you lots of food for thought. Just a massive thank you to our speakers for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having us. It was really good to be here.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
ditto. Thank you.
Thank you so much.